Alright, man, this is episode number 68 of the Cozy Corner of Cinema. This is being recorded on Saturday, July 15th, 2023 at 8:30 p.m. And I apologize if you can hear the fan in the background. I have it fairly close. The heat is still kicking our asses down here in Massachusetts, but I'm sure many of you in the country are dealing with that as well, let alone if you're in an area like, Arizona or Arkansas or one of these really just kind of hot places. But we're going to get through it. I love the summer. I love the fall. I love the winter. I love all the seasons, man. Spring is just great, man. I definitely wouldn't want to live somewhere where I'd only be able to experience one season of the year. And it's also great because you get into the mindset of a lot of great films. So like it's summer, and you're like, oh, God, what are great summer films? And you're like, oh, you can watch Do the Right Thing or La Piscine or just these really great films that you really feel the heat. Walkabout, just plenty of terrific films. Even recently, I was rewatching Apocalypse Now in 4K, and all those sequences early on, you just see the sweat on Martin Sheen's character's face, and when he's in Saigon, it just totally was like just felt right in the atmosphere. It was a hot day. I mean, I was watching that at night, but it was hot. I had the fan on, and you just felt the stickiness. You felt kind of the humidity, the warmth. Man, really gets you into the mindset. And then as we go into the fall and the winter, we want to plan accordingly of what we want to intake for films and literature and any art that we choose to take in, around our scenery, so that it may complement it. But I recently finally finished that Norman Mailer book. It took longer than normal. It's been a little busy the past couple months, so I haven't had as much of an opportunity to read as much as I normally am able to, but it got done. It was a long book. It's about 900 pages. Well, I think it was about 800 pages, with about 100 pages of the bibliographies, the notes, the thank yous, all that kind of stuff. So about 800 or so pages, but it's just a phenomenal book. Just a great look at just such a fascinating person that Norman Mailer was, and walking away from it, I just got such a new, just great perspective on who he was. He was such a misunderstood artist, and oftentimes, the parts of him being misunderstood was of his own doing. He'd say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, but ultimately, why I bring that up is that when I get to the end of that book, and Norman Mailer passed away in, I think 2010, I think around that time, mid 2000s. And I was getting to the end of that book, and talking about his final days, and he's in the hospital, and he's not able to talk as much. He can't write. Somebody who has written, I think it was some like 40 some odd books, and has directed films, and has just been he was a political activist. He tried to run for mayor at one point. Just this guy who in his final days, just coming to terms with his death, and just his work he felt his work was done, and it's very self-reflective in the way where I always talk about whatever it is you want to do in your life, man. It's easier to say you'll do it than not do it. I bring up the Norman Mailer book because if some of us, we don't know how we're going to go. Some of us will go of old age, some of us will go young, maybe it'll be an accident, maybe it'll be a heart attack, maybe whatever, man. But the point is that if you get to the point where you're on your deathbed, or you're, grasping on to those last moments of life, and you just kind of know that your time is up, you really want to think to yourself now that while you still have the opportunity of, what have I wanted to accomplish in my life? What artistic endeavors have I wanted to partake in that I've been putting off? You talk about, I'm going to be an actor one day. I'm going to be a filmmaker. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be that. But the next step is, what are you doing to actually, make that dream come true? If you're waiting for somebody to give you a handout, wait for somebody to, pick you up off the street and go, hey, you want to be a, big Hollywood actor? It's like, hey, man, you're going to be waiting a long time. It may never come. That's why whatever it is you want to do, you got to do it now, man. You got to start now, because, you're going to be sitting around. There are some films I've talked about before where, there's some films that are very low budgeted that people talk about, oh, anybody could have made that film. Anybody could have made that. Look like Blair Witch Project, or, a film like recently I loved that's, divisive, like Skin American. It's like, oh, anybody could have made that film. It's so low budget, so cheap. And I'm just like, yeah, man, anybody could have made it. And somebody did make it, and now they're getting now they're reaping the benefits, the rewards. They have the attention. Whether you like or dislike these films. I mean, they went out there, they did it. Look at the guy. Look at what the hell's his name? Damien Leone, I think his name. He did that. Did the Terrifier movies. He did All Hallows Eve, which was an anthology. Made up of, I think, a couple of short films that he did in different times. Because I think the original Art the Clown one was done in like 2004, I believe, but it was in the 2007 All Hallows Eve. My dates might be completely wrong on that. I didn't look any of this up. Anyways, then he made Terrifier, which got some talk. Remember, it came out. It wasn't really, I didn't see it. It's not really my thing. And then Terrifier 2 comes out, and look at that. I guess it gets this big kind of theatrical push. It goes in the mainstream. I mean, when I went to go see Indiana Jones, man, they had a poster up for Terrifier that or Terrifier 2, one of the two. They're gonna like re-show it or something like that. I'm like, man, there he is. They put in the time, they put in the effort, and now, you see news articles, Terrifier 3 is getting a big budget, and they're going to do a bunch of stuff, because, they didn't sit around and talk about, oh, how come this person has a lot of success and I don't? How come they're a big actor, a big filmmaker, and I'm not? They went ahead, they did the work, and, we all have different advantages and disadvantages. We all have different, different lives and different opportunities and all that, but ultimately, I think if you believe in something hard enough, and you really want something, doesn't mean you're going to automatically get it, but the point is that if you don't even try to get it and you just sit around kind of twiddling your thumbs and just, sitting back and just, coming home from work and just watching TV and just doing nothing with your life, man. I mean, if that's what you want to do it, man. Hey, it's your life. You're the commander of your life, man. But I know I ain't going to be doing that, brother. It's just, life's too short for that kind of stuff. It's just ridiculous, man. You just hang out with so many people. You just know so many people who just talk about, oh, we'll do this, do that, and it never happens. And it's just like, man, I got no time for that stuff. Anything can happen to me at any point. I'd rather, when my time is here, be like, you know what, till my final days, I work towards the dreams I wanted to make come true. And that's really all there is to it. But with that, man, a little while ago, man, what a treat this was this week. So a little while ago, I was talking about that new Midnight Cowboy documentary that was coming out, and I saw the cinema had showtimes up for it for that Friday, and I was like, man, I'll be there opening day. And wouldn't you know it, not only that, they also showed a new 4K restoration of Midnight Cowboy. I was like, oh, this is perfect, man. I wanted to rewatch Midnight Cowboy as is. I said I was going to rewatch it after I read the book, and I didn't. And then even when I talked about it, I was maybe I'll rewatch before I watch the documentary, and I didn't. So it was such a treat to go see that documentary. I saw that documentary first, and then I watched Midnight Cowboy after. And let me tell you something, man. Let me tell you something right off the bat. I'll talk about the documentary in a second, but so I see the documentary. It's a small kind of theater, it's the local kind of art theater. They show like a lot of foreign films, a lot of art films. If you have the opportunity to go to one of these theaters, you got to do it, man, because these films you ain't gonna see anywhere else, brother. Unless you want to wait for. But anyways, so I watch the film. A couple people in the theater, not too many. I'm watching it, I'm enjoying it. I'm like, that's good, and I got about an hour to kill. Like, all right, let me go across the room and grab a pint really quick. Grab a pint. Get some writing done. I got some great writing done in that time. And I go back. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna walk back over. I walk back over just in time for the film starting. And wouldn't you know, the theater is almost sold out, man. It is a whole theater of people. And let me tell you, brother, when I sit down and I watch this film, and then you get to the opening credits and you hear that beautiful Harry Nilsson, everybody's talking at me song. And you just see, you can just see the row of people next to you, and you just imagine, the people behind you just embracing this film that's almost 60 years old, and it's drawing out an almost sold out showing, man. And when the film was done, I mean, I'll talk about Midnight Cowboy too, but when the film was done, I had a gentleman and his, presumably his girlfriend or someone with him. He had a woman with him. And so, it was kind of silencing around, and I just kind of, was like, hey, was that your first time seeing the film? And very nice gentleman, man. He was like, yeah, it's my first time. And I, make a small talk conversation. I'm like, hey, what do you think of it? Like it, dislike it? And he's like, yeah, I thought it was really cool. And his friend, his lady friend's like, it was a lot to process. I don't really know how to feel about it. And I'm like, yeah, it's cool, man. It's like, hey, it's different strokes, different folks. You're either going to dig it or you're not. Just let it sit with you. And it's just crazy, man. It's just so great, the communal kind of feeling of everybody being in this cinema together to experience a film like this, to really take it all in. It's something like the great art, the best art really stands the test of time. that we can still come back here. A movie that was directed in 1968, released in 1969, we're watching in 2023 in a beautiful 4K restoration, which I assume that will get a Criterion at some point, because that currently has a Criterion Blu-ray. But the fact that you can sell out a theater, man, I mean, it's just fantastic, man. You know, even earlier this year when I had seen Bernardo Bertolucci's The Conformist, wasn't a whole lot of people in the theater, but it drew out a fair amount of people. And it's just like, that's just so great, man. You know, seeing it with an audience, man. I mean, you know, it's just films like that. It's just great. You know, it's really kind of puts into perspective the longevity of a lot of these films, man. But anyways, going back to, I'll talk about Midnight Cowboy after, but I want to talk about the first film that I saw the two, which is, I want to make sure I got the name up right here because this has kind of a long name. Bear with me for one moment. I don't want to pause it. I'm just going to look it up right here because it's a long name like the book. Because the book, I don't remember what it was called. It's called something Art, Sex, Loneliness, something like that. But the documentary is called Desperate Souls, Dark City, and the Legend of Midnight Cowboy. This is written and directed by Nancy Bierski. This has been distributed by Kino Lorber, so I imagine this will get a Blu-ray from them at some point, so if you don't have the ability to see the film theatrically, then you will definitely get the opportunity to see it at home. But this is what it is. It is a documentary about, in part, the filming, the production, the lead up to Midnight Cowboy, but as well as dealing with a lot of other issues and topics that the film addresses, along with what was going on in the cultural zeitgeist of the mid-1960s, man. They talk about a lot of the protest movements, the Vietnam War, man. They talk about a lot of, kind of the shifts in filmmaking, like, they talk about, they jump ahead a little bit with a film like Mean Streets from 73. I believe it was 73. I apologize if I get some of these dates wrong, bear with me. And Midnight Cowboy really paving the way for a lot of these films to be shot on location in New York. They're really kind of grimy, dirty streets. And there was another film they mentioned that I wish I had made a note of. There was a blaxploitation film that I knew that I'd heard of it, but I don't remember what it was. I'd never seen it, and they showed a clip of it, and I was like, man, I gotta get on that. Which I'm telling you, if you go watch this film, make sure you got yourself a notebook and a pen or a pencil with you, because you're gonna want to be writing down a lot of these films, man. There's a lot of clips in this film. I don't know how they got it, but they got a lot of clips. They got big films, small films. I mean, it's great watching this film because I've seen most of the films, or at least I've heard. I think I'd seen most of the films in here, heard just about all of them. But then there's a couple that I was like, ooh, I don't know what that is. I gotta watch that, man. And it's great. They talk about kind of the differences between John Schlesinger's background in filmmaking in London and some of the other kind of filmmakers at that time, sort of paving a new way for, not necessarily the new Hollywood, but a new kind of way of breaking a lot of taboos or the code at the time. Like they have films like A Taste of Honey in it, which they show, which is a terrific film from, I believe, 1961. But they also talk about John Schlesinger and his homosexuality. He makes a film like Darling, and he makes a film like Far from the Madding Crowd, and he decides to follow that up with Midnight Cowboy. And the editing in this film, I think, is interesting at times. I don't think it totally works, but early on, when they're talking about his transition from Far from the Madding Crowd, which didn't get the reception that he wanted, and he premiered it, he showed it in New York, and it wasn't like, it didn't really go over well, and the after party was like, was nothing, and they transitioned that with a scene from, I think it was Far from the Madding Crowd. I've not seen that film, but with some really wild animal violence, upsetting animal violence, and they transition that into I Want to Make Midnight Cowboy, and it's great. They have a lot of interviewees. There's not a lot of interviews with a ton of people from the film. Maybe a handful. John Voight he starts the film. He has a really great anecdote about talking about working with John Schlesinger, that almost made me emotional watching it, man. You can see that John Voight really has a real, he had a real friendship and passion for John Schlesinger. It was really, behind what he was doing. But, they talk about Bob Balaban, Jennifer Salt, Brian De Palma's actually in the movie very briefly over like a Zoom call, which is, I didn't expect that at all, man. They talked to some other people in the film, kind of their backgrounds on it. But, it's a good documentary, but I don't think it's great by any means, and I don't want to dog on the documentary, man, because ultimately I think that if you are a Midnight Cowboy fan, one, you got to read that book. While I'm talking, I'll see if I can pull out the book. You got to read that book, and two, I think you should watch the documentary for contextual sake. I shall say the book is called, the name I always forget, is Shooting Midnight Cowboy. Let me get the whole title here. Art, Sex, Loneliness, Liberation, and the Making of a Dark Classic. They got some long titles here. They actually, in the credits, they say inspired by that book, written by Glenn Frankel, which is a pretty good book. I think a problem that I have with both the book and the film, weirdly enough, is that I think more so in the case of the film, that because Midnight Cowboy is such an important film historically and in the context of just the film itself, there are so many angles to go at from. And I think ultimately the book at times has trouble where it goes off and does its own thing that's not even really related to the main kind of core story. It goes off on these little tangents that I don't think is totally necessary. And the film especially, I think, really has that problem, man, where there's a point in the middle where they have gone so far away from the film that when they come back to it, no joke, man, my hand to God, I forgot it was even about Midnight Cowboy. I'm watching the film and they're going off on something else, because there is a lot to take away from the film itself and the themes of the film, and ultimately, I think that this is a film that there could be many great essays written about it, and I don't deny that a great documentary could be made about it, but my feeling overall on it is that it's a little too schizophrenic with what it's trying to do. It's trying to tackle so many different ideas about the movement at the time, about the protests and the Vietnam War, and the idea of the masculine cowboy being demasculated and homosexuality, all very interesting, worthwhile topics in relation to Midnight Cowboy, but ultimately, here I'm saying ultimately again, for the 10,000th time, I just don't think that it correlated well in terms of transitioning from one topic to another. But I will say that I found myself agreeing with a lot of the points in the film, and a lot of points in the film I had never even thought of. And what's interesting enough is that I was watching the film, and there was a specific point that I had thought about in relation to the relationship between Joe Buck and Rizzo's character. And I'm thinking about it, and then, no joke, the next scene they mention exactly what I was talking about, and I was like, wow, man, that is something else. And what I'm talking about with that is something that I think contemporary screenwriters have fallen into the trap of time and time again, and it's something that is I find to be incredibly absent from contemporary films, and that is, I think contemporary filmmakers, a lot of them are scared or uninterested in a close, tender male relationship without it turning romantic. And what I say that is that they talk about in times that maybe there could have been something between Joe Buck and Rizzo, maybe not, but ultimately, there I am, or Rats, or whatever you want to call me, or Rico, whatever. But it's these two people who are lost and lonely and don't have anyone else. And because of their close friendship, that is what holds them together, man. And I think that unless the film intentionally sets that up in the forefront, let me tell you, man, I was telling you, the film that I saw earlier this year, Of an Age, was a fantastic film. One of the best films I've seen this year, about these two guys who get themselves in a situation where over the course of a day they start to kind of feel maybe more intimate with each other, and it's earned, because you really like these characters and their relationship is earned. But when screenwriters take two characters, male or female, and cop out by going to a romance angle. And that's the same thing, let me rephrase that there. It's not even just a homosexual thing. I feel like when you have a male and a female character in a film that are close friends, I think it's such poor screenwriting to divulge into a nonsensical romance if it's not properly built up. And that's what works so well here, is that their relationship, their friendship is so tender and is so unique. There was a film that I had seen a couple years ago that I talk about these films that when you first see them, they don't really stick with you, but then you just keep thinking about them over time, and you're like, why am I still thinking about this film? And it's a film that no one talks about, man. But I think that it might have a Kino Lorber Blu-ray still. I have the Kino Lorber Blu-ray, but it might be out of print. I really don't know. But it's a film that I love. A film from 1991 called Late for Dinner, starring Peter Berg, who would go on to be a big director. He's directed many of Mark Wahlberg's recent films, Lone Survivor, Deepwater Horizon, what was that, Mile 23, I think it was called. He's directed a bunch, he's acted a bunch, and you also have Brian Wimmer in the film. And it's a time travel film, but it's a comedy drama. But there's one moment in that film that I remember always stuck with me that I don't think a contemporary screenwriter or a contemporary audience would be willing to buy into without divulging into the melodramatic, where there's Brian Wimmer's character, his character Willie, they don't ever flat out say it. I should say Peter Gallagher and Marcia Gay Harden are both in the film, two terrific actors right there. But there's a part in the film where Willie, who is a bit slower, he's not quite autistic, but he's definitely got something a little bit slower with him, man. And he's having a bit of a panic attack, a mental kind of whatever. And Frank, played by Peter Berg, goes over to him and holds him in his arms and kind of like rocks him back and forth and says like, it's okay, man, I'm here with you. And it's such a beautiful moment. And I'm like, you would never see that in a film now, man, because these characters, these two men, love each other so much in a friendly way that if the film turned out to be in a relationship, it would just feel so devoid, man. It would feel like you walked right into your own trap, man. And that's what Midnight Cowboy does so well, is the friendship between these two characters. There's one part of the film, which I guess I'll talk about Midnight Cowboy now. If you've never seen Midnight Cowboy, John Schlesinger directed, 1969. It stars John Voight, plays his character Joe Buck, who's living in Texas. He has something of a traumatic past, living in the past, and he dons this cowboy outfit. He's talking to everybody, I'm going to go to New York, I'm going to be a hustler, I'm going to make money, I'm going to live the big time. Goes to New York and quickly realizes that, he is living in a completely different era. He's living in the era of, the cowboy comes in to save the day, but ultimately you have a cowboy in a town full of people wearing suits and ties, and they're going to con you, and, there is no nobility. It's a dog-eat-dog world. And, early on he sees a guy on the sidewalk, man. He might be dead, he might be alive, he has no idea, but he gives a look like, why is no one else even acknowledging him? Well, if no one else is acknowledging him, I guess I shouldn't either. It's just fantastic, man. And along the way, he ends up getting into meeting and forming a friendship with this character, Rico Rizzo. Everybody calls him Ratso, played by Dustin Hoffman. And they, at first, Ratso is really, he's like this dumb cowboy here. I'm just going to con and move on my way, because that's what he is. He's a con man. He's like a slimy, kind of greasy guy. But over the course of the film, we see that these are two people that really rely on each other, even if they don't know it. There's one moment in the film that, there's many great moments in the film that really stick with me, but there was one that, man, almost made me emotional when I was watching it, man. It's when, as the film is going on, Ratso, he's getting sicker and sicker, man. You just see it. His hair is greasy, his face is all wet and sweaty, his teeth are black, it's just bad, and he's in bed. And Joe Buck is like, I got to get you a doctor. I'm not gonna, I can't let you just, shrivel up and die here. And Ratso he's taken aback. He doesn't flat out say it, but he's taken aback at somebody who really cares for him. And he's like, what are you doing? No, don't do that for me. And it's so beautiful because this is a guy who is on his own. He's living in this abandoned kind of condemned property, and that's has some heat. It has like some heat on the stove and stuff, but like the the cold comes, and they're freezing. They're getting the blankets. Everything's dirty. Everything's scuzzy. He's trying to get to Florida. He says he's gonna have a better life there, and it's just such a haunting portrait of New York at this time. Where, I mean, this is a very dark film, and when I say it's a dark film, I don't mean it's dark as in content-wise. Well, I mean, while there certainly are upsetting moments in the film, it's dark in the way that after you're done watching, man, you really gotta let it sit with you, man. You gotta let these sequences sit with you. It's a thin plot, almost observational at times. These characters who are just going through these different scenarios and settings that may or may not be insubsequential or not, But it's us following them and seeing that maybe there's got to be light at the end of the tunnel, man. If you persist and you persist, there has to be something, and maybe there is, maybe there isn't. You got to see the film to find out. But then I gotta say, one of the things that really stuck with me this viewing, and let me tell you guys, I think I last watched this film maybe a decade ago. I feel like an old man when I say that, but I'm thinking back and I'm like, wow, man, it really might have been a decade since I've properly seen this. I remembered enough of it, but the one thing that I kind of forgot about that I think makes the film work so well, and I want to get the name up right here, is the editing of the film. The editing of this film is second to none. The way that, I shall say, the editor of this film was by this gentleman named Hugh A. Robertson, who also edited quite a number of films as well. He directed Melinda from 1972. He actually only edited 4 films. That is wild. He actually, after this, would edit Shaft from 1971, but then it looks like he did a lot of directing for some TV stuff for the next decade or so. He passed away in 1988, young age, 55. But the way that this film handles flashbacks, the way that they cross-cut and cross-transition between scenes, the way that the film intentionally leaves out, or prolongs, I should say, Joe Buck's history and his trauma as a child and traumatic events that have happened to him. There's a lot we don't know about this character, but we feel that if he was not so wide-eyed and not so, head held up sort of guy, this is a guy who would have broke a long time ago. Anytime they cut back to the sequences with him and his girlfriend, I just found so incredibly heartbreaking. And it's a film that it's one of these rare films I think truly captures what it feels like to be in a dream. There's a long, great sequence that I read that John Schlesinger apparently wanted to cut down, or somebody wanted to cut down, but I think works well for the film, when they're at this kind of hippie new age party, and Joe Buck's taking drugs, and Rizzo is taking food and stuff, and everything's just too chaotic for Rizzo. He wants to get out of there. He's sick. He's dying, man. And the editing and all that is so top notch. Now, I read that in the book, from what I can remember, and I apologize if I don't get this information quite correct, but I think that was either Andy Warhol's place that he would frequent, or a lot of the people involved were in that scene were involved with Andy Warhol, and he wasn't in that sequence because that was at the time he got shot and couldn't be in it. And they mentioned Andy Warhol in the film and stuff, kind of his influence on the New York kind of art scene and stuff. And they actually mentioned Paul Morrissey quite a bit too, who I've always found to be the far more interesting of the two. I mean, Andy Warhol is such a big personality and is such a staple of 60s pop culture, but ultimately I think Paul Morrissey has been the most interesting artist out of the two of them. And I mean, genre fans would see his work from like Flesh or Frankenstein and Blood for Dracula, or is it? Yeah, and those are both two good films, but it's interesting to see, and especially what Paul Morrissey thinks of Andy Warhol, how he had very negative things to say about it. He said it was very untalented, but that's a whole other conversation there. But that whole sequence it's hypnotic, and then as it goes on, it feels like at a certain point when they are away. Whenever the film steps away from New York in the third act, it feels like you're kind of awakened from like this kind of nightmare. It's really just kind of shows the dog-eat-dog world that it was becoming, and the harsh realities, man, of a lot of guys out there not really knowing what to do with themselves. Even like a character like Bob Balaban, who's in the film briefly, but he's a kid who is also lost in this world, man. I mean, He's a young gay kid who we don't know a lot about him, but we get the sense that he's just somebody who is very naive and very lost, much like the rest of these people in this film. That nobody really knows where they're going, and it's just ultimately a very tragic and sad film about loneliness, but possible hopefulness too. It's the way that you see it. But I don't want to talk about the ending or anything like that. I mean, the ending's been spoofed to death, and everybody knows about it and stuff. But I'm just saying, if you haven't already seen this film, you got to make sure to pick up that Criterion Blu-ray, especially during July. Man, you got the opportunity to get it for only $20. So, and yeah, keep an eye on the documentary as well. I don't think it's a great documentary or anything, but I think it's a solid companion piece and worth watching in relation to the film, as well as the book as well, should you come across it. But I'm going to be wrapping this one up, getting close to the 30-minute mark, so I'm going to say my final words. You guys enjoy the rest of your weekend. Have a fulfilling and joyful week. Make sure you are putting in the hard work for the work that it is you have to do, so you can reap the benefits and the rewards, man. That's what it's all about. All right, guys. You guys take care.